love of you. Okay, wash up, get your things, and I'll meet you at the pub.
Every single person in America knew this man. That voice, that smile, that feeling of safety he gave you every single Christmas without fail for 50 years straight. But what if I told you that the man on your television screen was not real? What if the whole thing, every interview, every Christmas special, every wholesome photograph, was the most expensive, most carefully constructed, most deliberately maintained lie in Hollywood history? Because I found something, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Cut to Bing Crosby on television. The Christmas special. The perfect setting. The perfect suit. That voice filling the room like warm light. The audience is laughing. He is charming. He is comfortable. He looks like someone's favorite grandfather. Now freeze that frame. Look at that smile. Really look at it. Because on page after page of a memoir that Hollywood tried to make disappear, his own son described what happened after the cameras stopped rolling. And it has nothing to do with that smile. We were all told the same story about Bing Crosby. The rags to riches rise. The golden voice. The man who practically invented the American Christmas. The legend who sold more records than any artist of his generation. 50 million copies of White Christmas alone. His face in the Guinness Book of World Records. His voice on every radio station in the country every single December without fail. But I had to go to page 40 of Gary Crosby's court-documented memoir to find what the publicist spent decades trying to bury. And by the end of this video, you will never hear White Christmas the same way again.
God, blimey, a quid.
A quid, a pound,
Yes.
Well,
You're a great favourite of ours, Mr. Crosby.
well, thank you very much. I'll just have to have 19 and 6 change. Do you mind?
And so is Jack Benny.
Oh, I'll put it back in that case. Say, you fellas work on the streets like this all the time, huh? Singing and dancing?
That's right. No
Yeah.
overhead.
No overhead. Well, now, that's a very smart move, very clever. But you know something? I would like very much, if you don't mind, I'd like to do a number with you.
You would?
Sure.
Well, it's all right with me, mate. But you better get your skates on if the copper comes along.
Oh, well, I've never been arrested for singing yet. I've been canceled and stoned and thrown out of... You tell me when to come
I'll
in.
tell you when.
The music starts playing. That voice comes in. And somewhere behind the warmth of it is a truth that his own children were too afraid to speak for years. Let's go back to where this story actually starts. Not the version Bing Crosby told on television. The real one. Born Harry Lillis Crosby Jr. in Tacoma, Washington. The nickname Bing did not come from some charming childhood story the way he liked to tell on camera. It came from a neighbor. Small detail. But remember it. Because the habit of rewriting his own story started that early, and it never stopped. By the mid-1920s, he was performing with the Rhythm Boys. Jazz stylings so precise that Dean Martin studied them directly. By the 1930s, the entire country knew his name. And the machine started building the image. The controlled narrative. The PR version of Bing Crosby that would be fed to the American public for the next 5 decades. Here is what that narrative needed you to believe first. That Bing Crosby was a family man. He married actress Dixie Lee. She was talented. She had a career. She had a future of her own. She gave all of it up. Every opportunity. Every role. Every version of herself that existed before him. Gone. She stayed home. She raised the children. She waited. And Bing Crosby filmed 4 movies a year and recorded album after album and became more powerful and more famous and more completely untouchable with every single month that passed. What was happening inside that house is not what the publicity photograph showed. Dixie was not okay. She was profoundly alone in the specific way that only happens when you give up your entire identity for someone who is never present and never accountable and surrounded at all times by people whose job is to make sure the public never finds out. She turned to alcohol. The addiction did not stay quiet. It spiraled. 4 sons grew up watching their mother fall apart in real time while their father was on a film set being photographed looking like the definition of the American dream. The press kept it quiet. The studios kept it quiet. Because in Hollywood's golden age, the press did not report what the studios did not want reported. That was not journalism. That was the arrangement. That was how the controlled narrative survived. And here is what the controlled narrative needed you never find out. While Dixie was at home drowning, while 4 boys were watching their mother lose herself to a bottle, Bing Crosby was conducting a secret affair with actress Joan Caulfield. I cross-referenced this across 3 separate sources before I said it on camera. A memoir. An autobiography written by actress Patricia Neal, who was herself entangled in the same circles. And a direct confirmation from Crosby's own sister Betty. This was not a brief mistake. This was sustained. This was documented. This was known by enough people in the industry that 2 sisters, Violet and Mary Barca, independently began trailing Crosby, recording his movements, mapping his meetings with Caulfield in real time. Amateur detectives building a file on the most beloved man in America, because they could see what the control narrative was designed to hide. But here's where it gets darker. Much darker. And this is the part that I genuinely had to sit with before I decided to put it in this video. Dixie Lee was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She was 40 years old. Her doctor made a decision that someone in her life went along with completely. The terminal diagnosis was kept from her. She was told she would recover. She was told she had time. She did not have time. And Bing Crosby, when his wife was dying of cancer in private while being told she was going to be fine, flew to Paris to film a movie, to maintain appearances, to keep the narrative clean. When Dixie died, he was not there. He was not holding her hand. He was not in that room. And at the funeral, the photographers who had spent decades printing the wholesome version of his family swarmed the graveside. His own son Gary described it as a circus. That was the moment the mask almost slipped, but almost was not enough. Because the machine was too powerful, and the image was too valuable, and there was too much money attached to the controlled narrative of Bing Crosby for any of it to come out while he was alive. Now we are at the 5-minute mark, and I need you to stay with me, because everything I've told you so far, the affair, the absent father, the dying wife he left in Paris, that is not even the worst part. The worst part was published in 1983, 6 years after Bing Crosby died on a golf course in Spain, having just won his last round of golf, and told his friends, "That was a great game, fellas. Let's go get a Coca-Cola." Those were his last words. 20 yards from the clubhouse, he collapsed from a massive heart attack. The image died with him. And then his son Gary picked up a pen. The memoir was called Going My Own Way. And when I tell you that Hollywood tried to make this book disappear, I am not being dramatic. I am being precise. Because what Gary Crosby described inside, it was not a complicated father with flaws. It was systematic. It was deliberate. It was a pattern of emotional and physical abuse that Gary had carried in silence for decades, because the name Bing Crosby was worth more than his testimony. Gary described weight checks, formal weigh-ins where Bing Crosby would assess his son's body and deliver his verdict. And if the number was wrong, there was a belt, metal-studded, used as punishment. A man who made the whole country feel warm at Christmas was doing this behind a closed door in his own house. And nobody said a word, because the NDA of Hollywood's golden age was not a document you signed. It was a silence you understood you were required to keep if you wanted to survive in that industry. Lindsay Crosby, the son who had always been considered Bing's favorite, came forward and confirmed everything Gary said. Think about what that cost him. The favorite son, the one who was supposed to be protected, standing up and saying, "My brother is telling the truth." Because the truth mattered more than the protection the name had always given him. Lindsay struggled with alcoholism for years. He struggled with depression for years. After Bing died, the family inheritance that was supposed to provide some stability quietly vanished. In December of 1989, Lindsay Crosby took his own life. Dennis Crosby, another son, also lost to the same darkness. His brother said Dennis had been trying to reach their mother ever since she died. 2 sons, gone. And the machine that built Bing Crosby's image never said a word about either of them. There is one more detail I need you to hear. After Dixie died, Bing Crosby began dating. He dated Pat Sheen. He proposed to Pat Sheen. She said no. In 1958, Pat Sheen married Dennis Crosby, Bing Crosby's son. The woman his father proposed to became his wife. And Bing Crosby allegedly never once acknowledged the daughter born from a subsequent paternity lawsuit filed against Dennis. His own grandchild. Unacknowledged. Erased. Because the control narrative did not have room for complications like that. Here is what I want you to sit with tonight. The scariest part of this story is not what Bing Crosby did. The scariest part is how long it stayed hidden. The scariest part is that the industry knew. The publicists knew. The studios knew. The press knew. And the machine kept printing the wholesome photographs anyway. Because the image was worth more than the truth. Bing Crosby is not the only one. He is just the one we are starting with. Because this is not a story about one man with dark secrets. This is a story about a system that was specifically designed to protect men like him. And that system did not die in 1977. It evolved. It got smarter. It got better at hiding. And the names attached to it today are names you still hear every single day. That is the first domino. But before we talk about what came after Bing Crosby, before we talk about the system he helped build and the people who inherited it, I need you to understand something fundamental about how Hollywood protects its own. Because most people think the cover-up ends when the person dies. It does not end. It accelerates. When Bing Crosby collapsed on that golf course in Spain, the first calls made were not to his family. They were to the people who managed his image. Think about that. A man dies, and the first priority is not grief. It is narrative control. Within hours, the story was being shaped. The legend died doing what he loved. Golf in Spain. Final words about Coca-Cola, and a good game with his friends. Peaceful. Wholesome. Perfect. Even his death was managed. And it worked for 6 years. 6 full years before Gary Crosby sat down and wrote the truth in a memoir that the industry immediately moved to discredit. The playbook was immediate and precise. First, they attacked the motive. Gary just wants money. Gary just wants fame. Gary is jealous of a legacy he could never match. His own brother Philip went on record calling him a liar, calling him talentless, calling him greedy, saying, and I want you to hear this exact quote because it tells you everything about how this system operates. To my dying day, I will hate Gary for dragging Dad's name through the mud. Now I do not believe him. Not the evidence suggests otherwise. To my dying day. That is not a defense of facts. That is a defense of an image. That is a man protecting a brand over his own brother's testimony. And that is exactly what the machine trains people to do. Protect the brand. Always protect the brand. Because here's what nobody talks about when they talk about Hollywood's golden age. The image was not just personal. The image was financial. Bing Crosby's estate. His recordings, his licensing deals, his royalties from White Christmas alone, which still generates millions of dollars every single December without fail. All of that money is attached to the image. The moment the image falls, the money changes. So the people who benefit from the image have a financial incentive to make sure it never falls. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is a business model. And it did not start with Bing Crosby. And it absolutely did not end with him. Because here's what I found when I started pulling on this thread. The same publicists who managed Crosby's image in the 1950s trained a generation of image managers who went on to handle the next tier of Hollywood royalty. The same studio executives who kept Dixie Lee's alcoholism out of the press in the 1940s wrote the internal policies that their successors used to keep far worse things out of the press in the 1970s. The 1980s. The 1990s. The system did not change. It expanded, and the tools got sharper. In Bing Crosby's era, the tool was the press blackout. You simply did not print it. Editors were called. Favors were traded. Stories were killed before they reached the page. By the 1980s, the tool had evolved into something more sophisticated. The NDA, legally binding silence, paid for with settlement money that came with a very specific condition attached. You take this check, and you never speak about what happened in that house, on that set, in that office, ever again. And the people who signed those NDAs were not weak. They were cornered. Because the alternative to signing was not justice. The alternative was being blacklisted from the only industry they had ever worked in. Blacklisted. That word meant something very specific in Hollywood. It meant your name was on a list that nobody showed you, but everybody consulted. It meant your calls stopped being returned. It meant the roles stopped coming. It meant you disappeared professionally while the person who put you in that position kept working, kept winning awards, kept smiling on television. Bing Crosby's sons were not blacklisted. They were something worse. They were dismissed. Their testimony was treated as tabloid noise in a culture that had decided the legend was more important than the truth. Gary Crosby spent the rest of his life watching the world celebrate a man he knew in a way the world never would. Think about what that does to a person. You know the truth. You have always known the truth. And every December, without fail, that voice comes on the radio, and the whole world goes warm and soft and nostalgic. And you're standing in a supermarket or sitting in your car or walking past a shop window, and White Christmas starts playing, and you know what was behind that voice. And nobody believes you, because the machine built the image better than it built anything else. And here's the detail that made me stop completely when I found it. When Bing Crosby died, his will contained a specific instruction. His sons from his first marriage, Gary, Philip, Dennis, Lindsay, were instructed to wait 10 years before receiving any inheritance. 10 years. His attorney explained it publicly as a measure to encourage financial responsibility. But Gary told a different story about what that instruction actually communicated. It communicated that even in death, Bing Crosby maintained control. Even for beyond that golf course in Spain, the hand was still on the wheel. And for Lindsay and Dennis, that 10-year wait was not a financial inconvenience. It was a final message from a father who had spent their entire lives making them feel like they did not matter. Lindsay did not make it to the end of that 10 years. Dennis did not make it either. Two sons outlived by the royalties of a Christmas song